What's going on, everybody? Sam Dando here today with a deck tech for you for Fi Rising Rebellion. Super excited to get into this one. Some of you may be wondering, why would you ever play Fi? Why am I here today? Why am I even presenting this deck list to you? How did we get here? I'm so glad you asked all those questions. It all started last week when I was scouring the annexes of YouTube and the Discord channels, and I was inspired to look at my boy Fi. Now, if you guys don't know, I've played Fi ever since Uprising has come out. I actually have a very soft spot in my heart for Uprising because it was the actual first event that I ever did with MinMax Games was the Uprising World Premiere in Las Vegas in 2022. That was the first thing I ever did with MinMax Games to work with them, and then shortly after I started working full-time. And at that time, Fi was of great interest to me, and I played him quite a bit. And this was back in the day where we had like Belittle, and it was pretty ignorant with stubby hammers and stuff like that. But I've always revisited the deck. I've always loved playing it all throughout the different iterations and all throughout the different metas. You know, last year, it was a really bad time for Fi, all throughout heavy hitters meta, and everything just outpaced him. He just kind of fell to the wayside. But now we have quite a bit of new support. I felt pretty reinvigorated to try to look for a different list, try some different approaches. Couldn't really find anything that was resonating with me very well with how I used to play Fi until I came across the great Slotty V3 Ashlyn, also known as Ashlyn. This video was put out last week or maybe 2 weeks ago that they were going over their deck list that they top 8'd 2 RTNs with. And I was deeply inspired when I saw this list. It was finally like one of the first Fi lists that I had seen this season that really made me think, wow, this looks just like the list that I used to play, except rather than all the filler chaff cards that you had to play because you didn't have enough Draconic, it was all filled in with some of the new support, and it just looked so consistent, so smooth. So I reached out to Ashlyn. We chatted about the list a little bit. I kind of refined it for my tastes. I have been testing it. I brought it to locals. I played it on Talishar, and I was just extremely impressed with the list. It has just been performing so well. It's been so fun. And I just really felt like I wanted to share this with you. So first and foremost, huge thanks to Slotty V3. I'm going to link the video in the description. Please go check it out and subscribe to their channel. I would really appreciate it. They did an excellent 30-minute video deck tech about it where they describe a lot of the things that I'll go into today, but it was a lot of really good information. I highly recommend that you check out Ashlyn's channel. And again, big thanks if you are watching this. Thank you so much for the inspiration and the idea for the list because I've been having so much fun. I've been kind of in a dry spell with Flesh and Blood and just in my passion for games in general. So this has actually fully reinvigorated me quite a bit and I've been having such a good time. So that's kind of the backstory for this list. I wouldn't expect anything to be super crazy or dramatic, but I will tell you that I think Fi is actually one of the dark horses of this meta. I think that Fi is extremely powerful. He's super fast. He can race with all of the other aggro decks in the meta. I mean, I'm talking like Aurora and Syndra. You can consistently keep up and outpace them in a lot of matches that I've played, which has been very impressive. And his durability and resilience across the meta is surprisingly very... what am I trying to say? Like against the Jarl and stuff like that, like you have 14 blues, 15 blues with the sideboard. You're super resilient to ice. Even Victor, like before Victor, you just get absolutely bodied. I've been keeping up relatively okay with Victor. It's still an unfavored matchup, of course, but I can actually beat Victor. Vincent is a little tough, but you could still beat her. So currently with the meta position, with Viserai leaving, I think that Fi is actually one of the top deck picks. I'm just going to go out on a limb here. I think Fi might be one of the best decks in the game right now. And if you are considering playing this for Pro Tour, I would consider it to be an actually very viable deck. So I'm going to show it to you today. You can all say I'm crazy. You can all say that I'm just like coping out of my mind, but I wouldn't be saying this if I didn't fully believe it. So let me just show you what I got, what I'm working with here, okay? So to start off, we have the Phoenix Flame. It wouldn't be Fi without the Phoenix Flame. You know, nothing crazy too inventive here today. I'm sorry to say. So we still have the one Phoenix Flame in the main deck. Then we're going to get to 3 Blaze Hedgehog, Headlong. I call it the Blaze Hedgehog. It's just super good. 0 for 4. Obviously, it has Go again. It's one of your good extenders of the deck. It's just always a good card to have. You're always going to want to keep this in hand and arsenal it or even just play it out when you block with your hand. Just play 0 for 4. Super good core component of the deck. And then we have our classic starters. So we have the 3 Ronin Renegade. I love Ronin Renegade. Even though it's literally just blankless text, every time I see this card, it just evokes such a great sense of joy in my life. 3 Rising Resentment. This card actually is really, really, really good right now. I feel like in the past, the on-hit hasn't always been super relevant, but right now, with how the deck is built, the on-hit has been surprisingly very threatening for me and has produced some massive turns that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to present. But because of the ability to reduce by 1 with things like Spreading Flames and Mounting Anger, it really smooths out your curve, and it has allowed me to do some crazy explosive turns. And in the past, I feel like I never really utilized that on hit, but today, I feel like I'm doing it quite a bit. We have Brand with Cinderclaw, one of the best starters in the whole deck. You'll see I'm also playing 2 yellow and then 3 blue, but like the basis of making cards draconic in this deck now is so powerful that this card is just an amazing card to see. And then we have Ignite. I don't know how long this video is going to be because after I do this deck tech, I'm actually going to go through some combos and just show you some interactions with Ignite and just things that you can do with this deck. This card is crazy. It is so insane how it interacts with, and it's unassuming because it's Fi. You're already super on curve with your resource base. And I've already had a lot of people, when they look at the list, they go, well, is Ignite actually doing anything? Like, what is the actual value of having Ignite in the deck? There's so many niche interactions because Ignite also applies to Fi's hero text as well. So it also reduces the ability to activate Fi. It reduces, also I should just come out right out the gate here and say like, this is an Emberblade deck. We're not playing Kodachis or anything like this. This is just straight classic Fi, which is my favorite way to play the deck. And I think also one of the best ways to play the deck. And not only are we doing that, I'm going to go a little out of order today. I'm just going to get a little wild today. If you guys watch my deck techs, you might know how I usually do it, but today I'm just going to get a little crazy. We're actually playing Dragon Scalar Flight Path. The main armor feat, we're not even playing Snapdragons. We're just going to be playing the Flight Path. So this is our armor. The Flight Path is what makes this deck, surprisingly. It's so, so good. There are so many interactions in this deck with the Flight Path, primarily to give Emberblade go again, so you can swing with it twice in a turn. Now, although that seems pretty unassuming, at first when I thought about this too and I was watching Ashland's video, I thought like, why would swinging with Emberblade twice even be that good? I mean, we're in a world right now where people are just doing super insane stuff. Swing with my sword twice, what does that even do? But then I thought about it in my mind and I thought, well, that's essentially like you're getting an additional intellect in a turn, right? You get an additional 0 for 3. So you get to get a 5, 6, maybe even 7 card hand sometimes by being able to swing with your Emberblade twice. And not only is it good because a lot of times your Emberblade will be coming in for 4. I've even had it come in for 5 value sometimes with Rake Over the Coals and Spreading Flames. So if you're able to swing with the Emberblade twice in a turn for 4 damage, that is just so good and so consistent. And then also the additional on hit to be able to threaten Salt, which we'll talk about later on. So I'm kind of gone completely off the rails already, but the reason why I'm bringing this up is because of the interaction with Ignite, where a very common way to start your turn would be an opener, going into Ignite, pitching a blue to swing Emberblade so you have 2 floating, and then you give the Emberblade go again with the Flight Path, and then you could swing the sword for a second time. That's like one of the bread and butter plays of this deck, and one of the ways that Ignite comes into the fray when you're trying to be very cost effective and cheat out your turns. But you can also just do things like play Ignite and then use Tunic to swing your Emberblade because it costs 1, super efficient. Ignite into your 1 costs, which we'll get into now. So now we get into the 1 cost starters. The starters. So we have obviously Mounting Anger, Spreading Flame. A lot of your big turns come from Spreading Flame now, and then Mounting Anger is just always still one of the most feared on hits when you play Fi. As soon as somebody sees Mounting Anger hit the board, they start to sweat a little bit, and they will pretty much always use their D-reacts to cover up the Mounting Anger. Just because the additional value adds up so much with this deck, it is really a priority on hit that they want to stop. But your hands can just be so consistent with Ignite where you can start with the Ignite and then play the Mounting Anger second, and you're already at 2 Draconic Chain Links at that point, and you've had to only exhaust 2 cards from your hand. So you don't even have to have a blue a lot of times to curve this out, and you can just throw the rest of your hand, which is really powerful. And then the last pseudo starter that I have, I mean, it literally is a starter, so it's not pseudo, but we're playing 2 Oath of Loyalty. This card is so good. You might wonder why I'm only playing 2. I've kind of gone back and forth. I don't know. I keep flipping back and forth between playing 3 and 2. But I think 2 is correct. The problem with this card is, as good as it really sucks when you have 2 of it in your hand. And if some of you have watched my other videos, you know the Sam Dando golden ratio rule, where if you don't ever want to draw 2 cards in your hand, you probably want to play it at 2. Because if you have it at 3, there's a much higher probability of drawing 2 copies in the same hand. So Fi, unlike other decks like Fang, where they're more than happy to be blocking with more cards from their hand to trade off since they have such higher value converting their daggers into value. Fi is not always the same because a lot of your game is going to be just consistently throwing tempo and throwing momentum at your opponent. And if you do draw a hand where you have double oath, that's just like a massive brick. It's literally, you have an unplayable card, you have an intellect penalty. Sure, you can arsenal it for your next turn, but a lot of your turns, you want to just be fully converting your hand every turn. And this deck is so consistent at doing that, that just having this card as not a liability is much higher. Also, the way that it interacts, you can seriously brick your high potential turns by not being able to play Salt the Wound or Tenacity, which can end up being really clunky, which I've walked myself into some bad situations because of that, because I got greedy, I arsenaled the Salt, and then my next hand I drew the Oath. And if I had arsenaled like a Brand or something the turn before, my turn would have been super powerful, but I kind of bricked myself up because of that. Yeah, whatever. So Oath of Loyalty, super, super good card, but I do think 2 is the correct amount in Fi. In particular, it's the most consistent and the smoothest way for the deck to function as a whole. So I might go back and forth between 3, but right now I feel pretty confident that I think 2 is the right amount. And now we get into like our supporting Draconic attacks. So we have 3 Display Loyalty. We have 3 Hot on the Heels, or Hot on Their Heels. And then 2 Red Lava Vein Loyalty. Primarily, these 5 cards here, they're all 3 blocks, which is why we have them in the deck. Anything that has the number 3 and 3 next to it and it's 0 is super consistent, and we love having that as durability for the deck. So and Hot on Their Heels has the on hit of marking your opponent, which, spoiler alert, that literally does nothing. This deck does not care about marking opponents, but your opponent might not know that. So when they see this coming in with an on hit with mark, they might be encouraged to block you out just because they don't exactly know what's going on. So use that to your advantage, which has actually happened to me quite a few times, which is hilarious. But don't get caught up in the text. It's really just because it has 3 block and 3 attack, and it's a 0 cost Draconic card. Display Loyalty, though, is a really interesting card in this deck. It is the only way that this deck has to be able to create fealty, which you can see right here. And I will say that fealty in this deck is insane. It is so sick. There are so many crazy plays and interactions that you can make just by floating a fealty or 2 fealty throughout the course of a game. So I love Display Loyalty. It's such a high value card for me when I see it. And when I'm able to create a fealty and just know that I have this sitting on the board, it unlocks so many options of play lines, which I'll get into later on as well. I have thought about playing that other, like the 1 for 4 display devotion or whatever. But as you can see, we only are playing 6 1 cost attacks, and that's very purposeful because you want to make sure that you're not putting yourself in disadvantageous positions or brickable conditions. Fi is all about being very consistent and throwing damage. That's how this deck was built. That's the intention of the deck. So I'm very, very cautious about playing a bricky 1 for 4 that doesn't naturally have go again. And fealty, although it is powerful, it is not necessary, and it is not one of the ways that this deck is trying to play. The deck is completely fine without fealty. Just having fealty allows for some additional extension and for some really cool interactions between Spreading Flames, Oath of Loyalty, and then your finishers like Salt the Wound. And then the blue that we'll get into later on, Dragon Power, which is also a ridiculous card. I don't know what B Gobs was thinking about that one, but I'm very happy he made it because I'm really stoked to be playing 1 for 6 blues. Again, we'll get it. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but we'll get there. And then for our finishers, we have Lava Burst. Ever since Fi's inception, this has just been the card that makes this deck absurd. We're never not going to play 3, and it is one of the best cards in the whole deck. And then we have a new card here, Compounding Anger. This card is actually really sick. It's essentially a 0 for 5 every time you play it. It's also a 3 block. It also can just be a 2-card 5 if you really get into a bad situation. You just want to pitch a blue to throw 5. But I've been very impressed with this card. The only downside, of course, is that since it's a natural 5 attack, very rarely do you ever get a buff from Spreading Flames or from Shuko. It doesn't trigger Shuko. but it's still a really good way to convert your hand, where if you just have a starter, a pitch of blue to swing sword, use Phi ability, and then play this at the end, it's essentially like another 2 lava bursts. So I've been very impressed by this card. I really like it. Again, I'm playing it at 2 because if I draw 2 in my hand, it's pretty bad, and I don't like that at all. But at 2, it's been perfect. I've been very impressed. I really, really like this card. It just does everything that you want it to do in this list. All right, and then we get to the yellows. We have 2 yellow Brand with Cinderclaw. The original list that Slotty was playing did not have these. I've always enjoyed playing 2 yellow brands in my Phi list, and every time I cut it, I always go, man, you know, the deck doesn't quite feel right. What does it need? I'm like, it needs 2 yellow brands. And I always put them back in, and it always feels great. Again, the fealty ability to turn things draconic is so powerful. Any more options that we have, which is pretty much only brands, to convert cards to becoming draconic is always welcomed. Also, in addition to the fact that it's yellow and you could convert it into a sword swing is super relevant, and the fact that it's 2 so that it triggers Shuko as well is super relevant. And the fact that it's 2 means that it's tutorable by Link's Mask, which isn't obviously always the most optimal play, but definitely comes up a lot of times where just being able to turn something draconic at the end can be very relevant. So having it in the deck, it is a really, really powerful utility card across the board, between being a resource base, the draconic text that allows it to turn things draconic, and then the tutor ability and the triggering of Shuko. So it basically just does everything you want in the deck. And then our other finishers here, we have 2 Salt the Wound. Classic Phi, especially with Link's Mask. I've salted people for 9, 8, 10. Pretty consistently, you'll get it to 7 or 8. I had a game against Syndra where I double salted them. I turned the salt actually fealty. With the fealty token, I turned 1 salt into Draconic that I had in my arsenal. So I hit them for 9 because it was under Spreading Flame, and because it was a Draconic card. I hope you're following this. Since I turned it Draconic with fealty, it gained +1 from the Spreading Flame, so it was 9. And then additionally, since it was Draconic, I was able to give it go again with the Flight Path, and then Link's Mask for my second salt, which I ended it for 8. That ended up being like a 32 or 36 damage turn. The Syndra did die. I did beat them that game. So Salt the Wound, still really powerful. Sometimes we side it out. I have 1 Tenacity in the sideboard, which I'll maybe sometimes slide out 1 salt and put in the Tenacity instead, so that you're playing 1 of each depending on how your opponent is going to be blocking you out. But again, with Link's Mask, it's still one of the bread and butter finishers of Phi, and it's still extremely powerful in this aggro meta where you're going to be racing a lot of decks. A lot of them just can't keep up with that kind of value. Salt, yeah, I don't know. That's all I have to say about Salt. To the blues, 3 blue brand. Of course, it's the best starter in the deck, so we're going to just play a bunch of them. Same things that I said about all the other colors. It's the worst one because it's blue, but it's also the best one because it's blue, you know? So you pitch it out and you get it for the end game. 3 blue Lava Vein, and then 2 blue Cinder Skin. This has always been the ratio that I've played in Phi. Again, your threes, or your blues, you typically want to be 3 blocks. Because if you're not going to be able to convert them into an Ember Blade, you at least want them to have for durability in your list. So this has just always been a really solid ratio. It's Draconic, it's a 3 block, it can convert into attacking if you need to, just kind of does everything that you need. And then we get the really insane blue that we got in this set, Dragon Power. This card is crazy. Like, having it as another pseudo finisher, again with fealty or with brand, where you can convert it into a 1 for 5 or a lot of times a 1 for 6 because of Shuko. It is just so ridiculous. So many people, when I've been playing this deck and I attack, and then I end with a Dragon Power and I'm like, 6 damage, they always pick the card up and flip it and read it. They're like, what the heck? Why does it do that? Like, who invented this card? And I would also like to ponder, I hope it was my boy B-Gobs, because I super appreciate you. Thanks for hooking it up. I know that you're trying to get Phi out of this game, and it does hurt my heart to know that if I put this list out and people start playing it and it start doing really well, that Phi might end up leaving the game. But you know what? At least we can go out with a bang, and I'm very happy to be able to do that. So Dragon Power, this card's crazy. You'll just see how insane it is when you play this list. And then we ended up with the triple Warmongers. Slotty was actually playing 3 Prowess of Agility, which I have here. I actually was very impressed by this card. I played it for a good amount just to play test it, to see how it felt. And I will say it felt very good. At locals, I played against my boy Kyle. Rest in peace, Kyle. He was playing CYB Desidori, and I did a 41 damage turn to him by setting up with Loyalty Beyond the Grave. And Prowess was so good in that matchup where you're just having to consistently prove to them that your damage output is going to be better than their defensive output. So having overlaps like that in the deck was really good. It also has some times where it shines, where it's like in an aggro mirror, if you're going first, you can sometimes play this out. There are certain downsides with the card, though. I mean, it is slightly of a liability where if you do get it on the board, you have to first attack 3 times to play it on the board so it sticks. And then for that period on, you're going to have to keep attacking 3 times to keep it on the board and then 4 times to trigger it. Attacking 4 times is not very hard with this deck, but sometimes you play this and then you draw your next hand. And although this deck bricks very, very infrequently, you could brick and then this card just does nothing, which is kind of a downside, but I've been very impressed with it. So if you don't have Warmongers, I think you could just play triple Prowess and that would be totally fine. This card was very good and I actually would love to find a way to play both. I don't think it's possible, but I'm playing Warmongers purely for the fact that in this game right now, there are decks like Vincent, there are decks like Azalea, there are the Warriors, and those matchups can be difficult, primarily Azalea and Vincent, and just having this as an option in the deck that can win you games or severely hinder your opponent at times when you play it, I do think is worth it and enough. Additionally, you have other decks like Riptide, which is probably making, at least in my local scene, is becoming more prevalent. And then also across the board, LSS has printed more action cards for people. So like you have, now for Assassin, you have Cut from the Same Cloth or Savor Bloodshed, which a lot of Assassins are playing, and Codex of Frailty, right? So even against like Slippy or Marionette, playing Warmongers is not that bad, where it's like if you end your turn and they've held a hand and you play it, sure, sometimes they might just play the attack and then hit you with like 4 reaction cards, but sometimes it can actually cause some detriment to their turn, so it's not completely useless. And at the end of the day, it's a 3 block and a blue, so it has a lot of application across the board. I just think that fundamentally into the matchups that you struggle with, Warmongers is more impactful and more powerful than Prowess is, which is why I have it in the list, and it doesn't impact you like at all to be Fi and play Warmongers. So that's why it's here. This is the main deck. Again, as I like to build my decks, I like to sideboard cards in, so this is 55 cards. And what I'm pretty confident I got the ratios right. It's 25 starters and 25 3 blocks, which is just like such a beautiful ratio of perfection, of balance, and really shows why Fi is super consistent right now. Like this deck's absurdly consistent and very, very durable. Like you actually do very well against disruption. Obviously like Assassins, I think you do pretty well. Guardian might be a little bit of a different story. And then you have 14 blues. So you're just very resilient. And then obviously the 8 yellows. So you're essentially like 18 resource based, which is just so sick. So yeah, I'm in love with this list. I'm in love with this main deck core. I think there's like very few things I would change about it at this point. It feels super refined and very, very consistent. The only things that I would maybe look at is like the Lava Vein Loyalty, which could maybe convert to being 1 more Oath of Loyalty if you wanted to play 3. Or, you know, you can look at maybe playing a 3rd brand with Cinderclaw, but the idea was more so just playing 2 Oath, 2 Lava Vein, 2 brand, and then 2 of the Compounding Anger. So I just think that like the ratios of this list are like almost perfect. So take a screenshot of this. If you want to get the main board deck list, I'm going to clean this up and go to the sideboard, and then we can talk about like different combos or things like that at the end. Another thing that I love about this list is that it's actually very affordable. Obviously, if you don't have the Warmongers, but everything in the deck is very cheap. So if you're a new player or if you are just looking to build this on the side for fun, it's not that expensive, surprisingly. Like even the equipment base, sure, you do have Tunic, obviously, which is more expensive. And then you have like Lynx Mask is pretty cheap, Dragon Scales is pretty cheap, Flame Scale and Tiger Stripe are a little bit expensive, but pretty cheap. So everything in this deck is like very cost affordable, and anything that is expensive, you can swap out to be more budget oriented as well. And it doesn't really impact the main goal of the deck, which is just present damage. As you can see, there aren't really any on hits in the deck because the point of the deck is not to present on hits. I was testing Breaking Point for a while as a one-of, and it was fine. There was points where it actually paid off, and I was able to, in the aggro mirror, threaten Arsenal and stuff like that. but it's not very consistent. And the point of this deck is not to present on hits. Ashen had brought this point to me. It's not about presenting on hits. It's just about presenting damage consistently. And then your opponent has to respect your damage because they're going to die. So your on hit is just threatening death, which happens very quick. Like if I turn 3 or 4, you are pretty much to the point where you'll be threatening lethal and they have to start respecting you. So in the sideboard here, I have different packages. So this is my racing package. So we have 3 Fire Tenant Strike first, and then 2 Rake Over the Coals. I am so impressed with these cards. I'm playing these when I'm just trying to go aggro, race, just go berserk. The Rake Over the Coals is literally Art of War at home. This card pretty much, if you set it up properly, will always get 6 value, which is crazy to be a 0 for 6. A lot of times, though, it's going to be ranging from the 4, which again, a 0 for 4 is pretty on rate, or slightly above rate for the deck. But I've just had some insane turns with Rake Over the Coals. Like I had mentioned earlier against my friend Kyle, where I did the 41 damage turn to him. That was because I had set up Rake Over the Coals in the arsenal, and then I had Loyalty Beyond the Grave to draw an additional card, and then I had the Scalers to give my sword a double swing. So swinging twice with the sword with Rake Over the Coals also buffs it, because it's Art of War at home, but also a little better because it also buffs your weapon, which can just be absurd when you're swinging with your weapon twice with Dragon Scalers. So I am in love with Rake Over the Coals. That has basically reinvigorated my love for Fi again, because when we lost Art of War, the deck just felt like it lost a lot of its edge and what made it really potent. And now that we do have something that's comparable, or that allows you to push that threshold again to get really aggressive, and also to just present like these massive critical turns, I'm super happy that Rake Over the Coals was printed. And I think it's very fair, and it's taken away a lot of the aspects that Art of War was kind of just like broken, and refined it and just made it a lot more fun to play with. And then Fire Tenant, it's a 0 for 4 essentially. You just have to be careful because it's not Draconic. So it can kind of mess up some hands, but there's so many ways in this deck to make it be fluid, whether it be with Brand, whether it be with Fealty, or even just if you want to just play this and then follow up with like a Blaze Headlong for 5 or something for a 2-card hand. That's a very reasonable 2-card 8. Yeah, 2-card 8. It's good math. That's pretty good in terms of just Fi and Ninja. I'm very happy with this card. And again, in a lot of racing situations, you don't really care because all you're just trying to do is present bigger numbers than your opponent. And now we get to the defensive stuff. I'm playing triple Shelter and then triple Loyalty Beyond the Grave. The Shelters could easily be Sink Belows, and the difference would be very marginal. The reason why I'm playing Shelter is because I think that in the Assassin matchup, Shelter does have better merit with the flicking, with Arachne and stuff like that. Just being able to have that option to discard it for the damage prevention is, for a deck like Fi, where your hands are already very consistent. Very rarely do I ever want to fix them, or do I need to fix them with the Sink Below effect. But having the Shelter as an alternative ability to just be more durable and to have answers to these plays that otherwise you wouldn't be able to answer, like with daggers being flicked at you and being marked and things like that. I found that the Shelter just gives you that slight edge in those matchups. And for me, who has Shelters, I think it's worth playing over Sink Below in a deck like Fi. I don't think that is the case across the board. And again, if you do have sinks and you don't have Shelters, I think you're totally fine just playing Sink Below. I just think in these minute situations like the Arachnes and stuff like that, it does give you a slight advantage. Loyalty Beyond the Grave is probably my favorite, top 3 for sure, in contention for maybe one of my favorite cards that's been printed in this set. This card, the design of it is so well done, where it still allows you to get that offensive overlap, but you have to like achieve it, right? You have to work for it a little bit, and you have to do it in a way that allows you to play the game a little bit longer, so you're mid-ranging. So I don't play this in every matchup. I will play it against decks that I plan on mid-ranging against, like Guardians and Assassin. And then, like I had mentioned, any kind of slower deck like Fatigue Dory, Desi Dory, or other Warriors. Not Fang, though. Fang, you just race. But I'm in love with Loyalty Beyond the Grave. The ability that it allows you to fix your hands at the end game, or to even just build up a massive 6-card hand is so sick. And the design of this card is just so well done where it doesn't feel unfair, it doesn't feel cheap, it feels like you earned it when you got there. And it puts your opponent on a slight clock where if they are trying to mid-range and tempo you out of the game, having this as an option to just know, like, okay, they now have the potential to push if I let up on them or if they get the opening to push. It just puts a lot of passive pressure on your opponent as well. So this card is so sick in Fi, and I'm so glad that they made it. And now we get to 2 Flame Call Awakening and then your second Phoenix Flame. These are in here for decks like all the MST heroes, basically. So if you're playing against any MST hero, I play this just because you don't want your Phoenix Flame to get banished by Passover or having like one of the assassins banish it. I don't play this into Marionette or anything like that. It's mainly new that I'm concerned about. And then I also play this into Vincent. The Vincent matchup is actually quite difficult. I don't think it's impossible to win, but you're definitely unfavored. And a big reason for that is that she has so many ways to disrupt you or answer your usual pattern of aggression. Primarily with Cole, that's like the worst one now is Cole. But also she has the headpiece, Face Purgatory, and then Succumbs, which can really, really disrupt your hands. Even though you are very resilient, still losing one card can be pretty detrimental. But the worst case scenario that we don't want to happen is where you do your normal play pattern of attack, 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 and then you activate Phi, and then once it resolves, they Cole you, and you have no other card in your hand, so you have to banish your Phoenix Flame. And at that point, you can get into some really dicey situations. So you always want to try to play around that. But having the backup flame in the deck means that you can leverage your flames as hand disruption. So if they do that to you, you can actually recall a flame to purposely banish it because you know that you have a second one in rotation. I don't think many people are going to be playing like invert. If they are, good for them. Like, get wrecked if they're going to invert both of your flames. But I still think having the backup flame against Vincent is super important just because of how uniquely they can interact with your hands on your turn. And particularly if they wanted to, they can pretty easily target your flame out of your hand and make sure that you don't get to play with it, which can be super detrimental to your game plan. And especially over the course of 5-6 turns, you can just lose so much value. So it's more of an insurance policy just to make sure that against those heroes, your deck just doesn't completely fall apart because you've lost all of your abilities to interact in your consistency with the flames. So I think that it's quite good tech. Obviously, you don't like having a second flame in your deck that that you'll draw, which always sucks. But it is what it is. It's just like feels very Yu-Gi-Oh-esque. I used to play Yu-Gi-Oh. This card feels very Yu-Gi-Oh-esque, so I'm kind of used to that. But if you do not want to play this, I think that that's fine. Just realize that there's consequences to your actions, and that if you do lose your flame, you are going to have a really, really sad time. And then the other utility here, I have double Command and Conquer, and then the Tenacity, like I had mentioned earlier. Tenacity is replaceable. Some matchups, like Enigma, I'll play it against Enigma. Some matchups, Salt isn't always the best, so you're okay with siding out one Salt, siding in one Tenacity, so you actually have the option. So it's a lose-lose situation. If they want to just take a bunch of damage to the face, you can punish them with the Salt. If they want to try to full block you out, you can punish them with Tenacity. Tenacity is really good against the Warriors. It's also really good against Guardian. And I think I would like to play 2, but just with sideboard space and currently how the meta is kind of developing, I don't think 2 is necessary. I think the 1 is completely fine. It just sucks at the beginning of the game when you like draw it and you have to block with it and you've kind of lost that option from your deck. But I kind of intentionally try to keep it in rotating it within the deck by pitching it for Sword or something like that. And then Command and Conquer. Again, you don't have to play Command and Conquers if you don't have them. You could probably easily just play like Battlefront Bastion or something. Like these are in the list for Enigma, Prism, primarily Prism, right? Like I want to have some poppers into Prism. I'm also playing it into Jarl, just because sometimes you want to just trade 2-card hands and it's pretty good. And then another big reason for Command and Conquer is Riptide. I think having Command and Conquer against Riptide is really big. And right now, my local meta, I have a number of people playing Riptide. I don't see Riptide going anywhere. I honestly think that Riptide is going to continue to be pretty powerful. And this matchup can be kind of difficult. So Command and Conquer, just across the board, I think is like the reason why it's so expensive and one of the main staples in the game is because it is one of the best 2-for-6s. So if I'm only going to have 2 slots available for a 2-for-6, I'm going to put in Command & Conquer because it's the highest value card to me at this point. So again, but you can easily play a 7-power popper instead, like Battlefront Bastion or Blanche, or any other 2-for-6 that you really have. I just think this might be some boomer tech for Fi. Like in the old days, I always had 2 Command & Conquer in the sideboard. It might just still be my proclivity for being an old man, but I'm going to keep it in there because it's what I know, it's what I'm comfortable with, and I've been Command & Conquering people for like 3 years now, and I don't plan on stopping until the card is banned. So then we have 1 energy potion. Again, some boomer Fi tech, but the Jarl matchup can be quite difficult. So I put this in just for Jarl, which you might say is unnecessary, but I think that I'd rather be prepared than not be prepared. It adds another blue to your deck, so you get at 15 blues, which is pretty good. And then also you can have those turns where they kind of disrupt you and stop you. You just have 1 card hand, and then you can just plop the energy potion down so that you'll have more safety when you get to those blizzards, or you do get your bigger turns and you don't want to get disrupted by the stalagmite or things like that. So it's actually performed very well for me. That's a pretty open slot. You can put anything else that you want in there, but for me, I don't think that it costs. There's not too much opportunity. I don't know if that's the right word. I don't think there's much cost to being energy potion in your sideboard for Jarl. I do respect Jarl, and again, in my local area, there's more Jarls coming around, and I don't foresee that changing. I still think Jarl is going to be quite impactful in the meta, especially with like Syndras and stuff like that still running around. So you have a way better Jarl matchup than Syndra does. Just really depends on which way they're leaning. If they're going super ice, I think you actually have a pretty good opportunity to beat super ice Jarl because it's more focused on disruption than it is on damage. And you can actually play through that disruption pretty well. You're pretty resilient, and you can kind of hold your armor until the end game, till when you want to kill them. Then you pop off with like your links and stuff like that. But if they're playing Earth Jarl, I think that's like a lot worse. Just because the fellings and the plows, and there's just so much damage that they present to you that it can be pretty difficult to pivot or find your opportunities to actually beat them. So, but again, energy potion, super low opportunity cost. I think it's worth having in the sideboard. If you don't, just play whatever you want, and I'm not going to be mad at you. So this is the sideboard. I love this sideboard. It's so consistent. It's super. It has like everything that I would want. Some sideboarding like advice, I guess, is if you want to just race, it's set up at 55 cards. You can just put these 5 cards in, boom, you're ready to go into any aggro race. Or if your goal is just to be as consistent as possible and to just kill your opponent, just play those. If you want to put in the flame calls, I take out 1 mounting anger, 1 spreading flame, put those in, and then put the flame in. Again, tenacity. Some matchups you might want to side out the salts, but most of the time I'm just taking 1 salt out and putting in the tenacity. Command & Conquer is pretty easy, just slot it in. If you do want to side anything out from the deck, I'd look at Lava Vein loyalties first, and then maybe 1 display loyalty, but my Lava Veins have pretty much been like my main, just kind of swap that out for something else. Especially because CNCs are still 3 blocks, so you're primarily just trading 3 block for 3 blocks, so you still maintain the ratio of like consistency for your durability. And then for the D-Reacts, I primarily putting these in against Assassin and Guardian and Azalea. But outside of that, like I'm not really playing the D-Reacts, definitely not into any of the aggro decks like Aurora or Syndra. We're just going to race them. We're not even going to worry about trying to like mid-range them because I think that's a losing game anyway. So don't even worry about playing those into the aggro decks. It's just going to be the decks that are going to be trying to disrupt you and stop you from playing the game. So you'll need these to pivot and also to just be able to defend from some of the disruption that they're going to be trying to hit you with. So yeah, pretty straightforward sideboard. I really like the consistency. Again, I'm going to say that word. I probably said consistency at least like 15 times. If there was a consistency counter on the video, I'm sure you'd hear it so many times. But that's one of the reasons why I like Fi and why I love this deck so much is just because I know what to expect. You know, I sit down for Armory. I sit down for an event. I can count on it. It's reliable. And a lot of decks right now in the game are pretty inconsistent. Like Syndra is a very inconsistent deck. You have really high highs and you can have some really low lows. But with Fi, you're pretty even in what you expect throughout the game. Like I had mentioned earlier, I'm pretty consistently always presenting like a 26 damage turn by turn 3 with the Lynx Mask. And that's kind of just like average, you know. I've had games where I've popped off way harder than that with like 30 plus damage turns. Like I mentioned, the 40 damage turn that I had, that obviously took some setup, but still 40 damage is nothing to scoff at, especially in the game currently and how it's paced. So, but yeah, just some like normal combos with Ignite. You can always go, like I was mentioning earlier, where if you have a blue, you pitch your blue, you go Rising into Ignite, pitch your blue for a sword swing. You'll have 2 floating over. You can Scalar to swing with your sword again. So that's essentially like you just gained another intellect for that turn. Especially if you have a Spreading Flame that allows it to be buffed. And then you can finish out, obviously, with Assault the Wound because you've already hit them an additional time as well. And this can just scale even higher when you start doing it with Rake Over the Coals or, like I mentioned, again, Spreading Flames. Ignite also really good with your 1-for-4s, like following up with a Mounting Anger. So now this allows you to be able to have these all red hands with the 1 costs, like something like this. Where you can just go Oath into Ignite, into Mounting Anger, and then end with that, and then a Flame, or Arsenal, use the Mounting Anger with the Flame, and then Arsenal to Rising. So it just allows you to play out your hands super efficiently. It does also work with CNC, which can be ridiculous sometimes, where I've had CNC in the list, where I play Ignite. You activate the fealty in response to the Ignite. Don't make this mistake, because if you play the Ignite and it resolves and then you activate the fealty, it's going to reduce the fealty cost. So if you ever are going to play Ignite, also with Rake Over the Coals, just keep this in mind. If you play Ignite, you have to play the instance in response to the Ignite's effect trigger. Okay, don't make this mistake. I've done this so many times on Talishar. But fealty works like that. So you play the Ignite, you pop the fealty in response, and then you use Tunic to like CNC them for 6. It's just kind of stupid. It's super hilarious to watch your opponent's face when that happens, because nobody would ever expect that as a follow-up. But that's kind of the goofy things you can do with fealty and Ignite in general. I'm trying to think like off the top if there's any other hilarious or silly things that I've done with this deck, because there's been so many silly things that have happened. But Fi is kind of a difficult deck now. Like there's a lot of interesting sequencing that happens, and there's a lot of intricacies in how you can navigate lines. So although it is like a pretty straightforward aggro deck and it tries to continuously do the same thing, the way that you get there can change pretty frequently as the games progress. And you have a lot of flexibility in your lines now with cost reductions and resource curves and things like that. So the decision making can get a little bit complex at times. So just run the deck. It's a combo deck at the end of the day too. So as you continue to play the lines, you'll start to see and they'll unveil to you and you'll become much more comfortable with it. But yeah, I don't know how much more I want to say. I think the only other thing that I have to mention is that Tide Flippers, I'm still trying to figure out how and why I want to use this card. I'm currently not playing AB into Aurora. I'm just kind of racing and saying good luck. If you have it and you're faster than me, then congratulations. But otherwise, I'm just going to try to kill you. And most of the time I kill them. But I do think that Tide Flippers is necessary against Vincett. I have tried to race that deck, and I just don't think it's possible to do consistently. So I do think you should be playing Tide Flippers so you can kind of leverage advantages, and then at least you get to the end game grinds where you don't just instantly die to true damage because you can't block their Arcane. And then you also play this into Kano. I don't really know how relevant Kano is right now, but outside of that, I'm still struggling to find more reasons to play Tide Flippers now that Viserai is gone. I don't even know if it was proper to play it into Viserai, but I'm only going to be playing this into Vincett and Kano at this time. As I continue to get more matchup knowledge and play more matchups, I might change on that and maybe try this against Aurora. But at this time, I'm just valuing the 1 block on the Scalars and the ability to convert this into 3-4 extra damage with the sword. And then, of course, you can also just double finisher with it still. The only benefit of playing Snapdragons is that you can unbrick your hands. And a lot of times people that are playing Snapdragons are also playing Enlightened Strike and Snatch, which it combos well with those cards. But I always felt like those cards were not really what you wanted to be doing in Fi. Like Snatch was good, but it's not Draconic. It wasn't very smooth. It did present some kind of clunky hands sometimes. And this deck is just super straightforward. Everything is synergizing within the list, and it's just built to do the same thing over and over and over again. So I've been very impressed with this list. Again, big thanks to Ashlyn. Slotty V3. I'm going to put the link in the description. Please watch the video. She had a lot of good information in that video as well. And I would really, really encourage people to try this deck out. I mean, I'm trying not to be too hype about it and get a bunch of people to play it and get FI to LL, but I genuinely believe that this list has a lot of potential, and I think it's going to be very, very strong moving forward into this meta. I want to call out Aggro Blaze. You used to play a lot of FI, and now you're just playing all these other like Aurora. You're an Aurora player now. You're now playing Rune Blades and stuff like that. I want you to go back to your roots. Try this deck on stream. I'll be in the comments, and then I want to see your face as you just explode on people. So I'm calling you out, Aggro Blaze. I need to see this list on stream for whenever this comes out. So thanks again, guys. Love having you here. I hope that you learned something. I hope I didn't ramble too hard. I feel like I was kind of all over the place with this deck list today because I'm just really excited about it. But it's good to have something to be excited about in life, you know? As I get more old and more disgruntled and I just kind of go through life trying to find joys, when you do find those things that make you excited and make you happy, hold on to it, embrace it, and just go for it. And that's what I'm doing with this FI list. That's what I'm doing with Flesh and Blood. And that's why I wanted to share this with you today. So for the last time, big thanks to Slotty V3. I really appreciate you putting out this list and enlightening me and reinvigorating my love for Flesh and Blood right now. And then for everybody else who's watching, I hope you learned something. Again, if you have questions, please leave it in the comments. Give it a like, subscribe, and I plan on having some more deck lists for you in the next couple weeks, unless I just play this because I'm obsessed with it. And if that's the case, then expect me to be playing a lot of FI. So I'll see you guys soon. Thanks for watching. I'm Sam Dando yet again, and this is FI Rising Rebellion. We'll see you in the next video. Peace, guys. All right, let's get into this one. This is gonna be an exciting one. I'm ready for this one. All right. What's going on, everybody?